Hi, all. Good evening and good morning to each one of you who all are present today. I'm Chitra Khatri, Program Executive at IDEX DIO, and I would like to welcome you all on the fifth Gurukul session, which is going to happen on the topic of the venture experience. Gurukul is the education series under Indus-X, which is inspired by the ancient Indian tradition of propagating education. The focus here, as in a Gurukul, is on learning through experience and discussions with the visionaries from India and the US. These semi formal discussions engage startups, students, and innovators in a meaningful exchange of ideas and insights. Today, we have an honor to have a panel of four distinguished individuals, including startup founders and investors. We will dive into the venture capital investor perspective and founders' journey as they navigate the India and US defense ecosystem. Let me introduce to our esteemed panel members. So we have Mr. Garut Acharya, who is the investor at 8090 Industries, Mr. Gaurav Seth, who is the CEO of PeerSight and winner of Indus-X Challenge, Mr. Sameer Joshi, who is the CEO and director at New Space Research and Technologies Private Limited, Ms. Neha Satak, who is the founder of Astro. This fifth session of Gurukul marks a very special day as we recently completed 1 year of Indus-X on June 21. So in all, we can say that we are celebrating the first anniversary of Indus-X with Gurukul. Indus-X, which stands for India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, it is actually a strategic initiative designed to strengthen defense innovation and cooperation between India and the United States. So as you can see, all the startups and investors who are present over here are actually, you can say, the part of Indus-X, and they are here because of Indus-X. The idea of Indus-X was to accelerate joint research, development, and production of advanced defense technologies by fostering collaboration among governments, industries, startups, and academic institutions. We here focus on the various topics like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, aerospace, and quantum technologies. So without further ado, let's begin our today's session. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the day, Mr. Kunal Bhandari, who is a fellow at the Technology and Society program at Carnegie. Over to you, Kunal.
Thank you, Chitra. Hello, everyone. Good evening and good morning as well to our viewers joining us from the US. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this fifth edition of the Gurukul panel discussion, which is a part of the Indus-X Education Series, a series where we bring together key stakeholders to essentially share their learnings from the defense innovation ecosystem. Now, this panel discussion has been jointly organized by the NSIN within the DIU of the US Department of Defense and the IDEX within the Indian Ministry of Defense. So I just want to thank everyone who has really helped put this together for the fifth edition of the Gurukul Education Series. Now, as mentioned earlier, we're sort of privileged to have an esteemed panel of industry experts who will delve into the topic of the venture experience. So before we begin, I just want to have a few housekeeping notes for our viewers. The panel discussion will last for about an hour or so. So it's going to last from 5:40 to 6:40 p.m. Indian time. And I think it'll be around 9:10 in the morning on the Eastern Standard Time in the US. This will be followed by 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. So for the purpose of the Q&A, I'd like to request all our viewers that please keep your questions in the Q&A box and not the chat box. And also when raising any question in the Q&A box, please identify the speaker who you want to answer the question. So with that being said, thank you to everyone joining us, and let's begin our panel discussion. So for the first question, I'd like to come to you, Gaurav. Now, PeerSight has made some impressive advances in the field of Earth observation. Your state-of-the-art synthetic aperture radars have been critical for this. But the thing is that given that most SARs are for multiple applications, why did PeerSight make the decision to focus on a niche application like maritime applications? And furthermore, as a follow-on to this first question is, how have initiatives like the Indus-X played a role in helping you make this particular decision? Over to you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Kunal, and thank you, team, for having me here. So to answer your first question without getting too technical, I'd just like to, tell a term that for a synthetic aperture radar, the higher resolution you go to, the more power you need to transmit, right? So essentially, people have turned 2000 kg synthetic aperture radars to 200, 150 kg, but are still trying to achieve the same resolution. The laws of physics come and catch back in terms that they can essentially only take 10 to 15 images per day, right? And then dividing that across applications is a tricky part. So that's where at PeerSight we saw a huge white space that none of these small SAR companies is able to cover the open oceans. So when you turn a large satellite to a smaller form factor, why not try to do less? And in the maritime domain, while trying to do less, we are still fulfilling all the purpose to detect these ships, which do not require very high resolution. So that's the reason, at PeerSight, we believe that we want to go application specific. And maritime itself is 70% of the Earth, so it's a wide enough application to cater to. And regarding your second question for Indus-X like initiatives, so I feel, as a deep tech founder, there are two major hurdles we face. The first one is like a chicken and egg problem, where you need resources to build products, and for resources you need money, and for money you need to show revenue. So it is kind of a chicken and egg problem. So initiatives like Indus-X, help you break down, get you a data point in middle where there are actual problems from the users which are thrown at startups, and you get this great platform in order to come forward and solve them. So at PeerSight particularly, we were focusing totally on the maritime domain, as I answered before. And the first challenge was around maritime ISR. So, both our sister entities winning it from India and US really helped us getting, anchor customers from both Indian and US Coast Guards. So we could get office hours with them, understand their problems better, and solve them.
Thanks, Gaurav. I think you mentioned about being the winner of the two challenges, both the US side and the Indian side. I'll come back to you on that in the course of this panel discussion. But you mentioned something interesting about how, a lot of deep tech companies sort of face challenges when it comes to resources. And from here, I think I'd like to pivot to know Garuth, who sort of might have the answer, which I'm looking for. Garuth, a lot of deep tech is usually incubated through military contracts, defense contracts. And given that these projects have a long lead time and the patient capital here is required to be long-term, how does 8 or 9 Industries look at, making a judgment call early on, whether the tech which is being pitched to it is actually going to play out the way it's being positioned?
Conrad, thanks for having me, and appreciate DIU and IDEX for organizing this. Look, I think you have two kinds of investors playing in the deep tech space. You have tourists who are, B2B SaaS folks, who are now kind of dipping their toe in. And then you have engineers and hard tech folks who've spent time in the industry, or either prior military, prior government, or are engineers who have worked in the space industry before and are now investors. And I think, being able to say, is this company that, is pitching me, where are they on terms of the technical readiness level? Is this a science project that should be at a lab? Is this, something that with, private and public sector capital, can it scale to actually becoming a $1 billion business that can return a fund? I think that's kind of like where you should be relatively technically savvy in order to make that discussion, or in order to make that decision. So I think, my background was I spent time at SpaceX, Blue Origin. I used to work for the Department of Defense. And so understanding, is there operational needs of the technology, right? Are you just making an invention for the sake of an invention? Are there customers, whether it's the, US government, Indian government, or governments plural, allied nations who are interested in this? Are there private sector clients, dual use technology? Like, these are all different things that we as investors look for to say, is this invention going to generate money, and how much capital is needed? And I don't think, as an American investor, we're scared of making investments in deep tech. We're investors in Varda, which is in space manufacturing, right? So that's, high CapEx intensive. We're investors in Orbit Fab, which is on orbit refueling, CapEx intensive, right? And so the signals that are required also require, the federal government to chip in, allied governments to chip in. So when I look at investments, I think public-private partnerships are a big thing. Is the public sector willing to help foot the bill in terms of R&D and be a good partner? And so I look to the IDEX folks, or I look to Ensign, the Defense Innovation Unit, to be a big part of these conversations. So I think from that standpoint, technical investors are very excited about this renaissance of deep tech. We're excited that there's a lot of capital in this industry. And I think what we look for is strong signals from the government, which brilliant innovators like on this panel and attendees to this Zoom call can go ahead and run with, and we can invest in knowing that there will be stable demand for this product. So that's my 2 cents on it.
That's a good segue into something which I've observed recently, which is, to be honest, the Indian government has over the past couple of years come out with a range of policies on drones, on robotics. They have a semiconductor incentive scheme as well. There's talk about a draft deep tech policy too, right? So the Indian government sort of seems to be really, getting its act together when it comes to taking stock of the deep tech ecosystem, especially with the focus on hardware. Now, you spoke about, Garut, about how the government could play a larger role here, right? What do you make of the recent announcement of the Indian government to sort of come up with a kind of a fund for space companies? It's about 1,000 crore rupees fund, and what do funds like yours think about possibly co-investing with the government? And as a follow-on to this question, is there a possibility of a dedicated deep tech fund within the Indus-X mechanism? How would you possibly view the Indus-X as being sort of a platform for pursuing an investor fund for incubating deep technologies?
Look, I'll speak in high level. What fires me up, I think, are the Indians taking this very seriously, right? I mean, there's 2 things that I look for is, will this be done by the government's in-house, like innovation, or will it be done by private sector companies, right? The signals that I'm getting are the best engineers, right? All these BITS grads, these young IIT grads, so on and so forth, the Surathkal grads. These guys are brilliant students, and they're not going to go work at Google. They're not going to go work at some fintech or grocery delivery company. They're building deep tech startups. So for me, that really fires me up. And the Indians are investing, which I think is great. I think for me, what's really important is 2 sides of the coin. A, is the government providing strong signal demand and capital. That's one. But the second one is, on the second side of the coin is, will this innovation be done by private companies? And will that large chunk of the 1,000 crore fund be targeted towards, startups, or let's say growth companies? Or will that be done by the Indian primes, the large players, like the HALs, so on and so forth? Or will it be done by the innovation entities within DRDO? I mean, the Indians do, like ISRO does a lot of stuff in-house. NASA contracts to SpaceX, to Blue Origin, to Varda, right? And so for me, I think looking at, there is a lot of capital that's going in. Where is it going, I think, is important. If it's only going 90% of it to the big players, then I think the startups are going to have a problem scaling or accessing that. As for Indus-X being a platform, look, I think you're bringing investors. I'm excited for what's going to, for all the conversations that have happened over the last 6-7 months. You have Joe Lonsdale from 8VC, who was in Bangalore recently, organized by Indus-X, right? Like you have the top player deep tech people who are fired up to work directly with the Indians. And I think just a little bit more direction and clear guidelines that say, here's the platform, here's the investment strategy that the Indian government's doing. Now VCs go run with it based off of what we have here is what I'm very much looking forward to, and it gets me very pumped up.
Thanks, Garut. Sumit, that's a great segue to sort of what I want to bring up next, which is this talk about how do we sort of develop technologies which can scale? How do we the Indus-X is all about defense collaboration with the U.S. and India working together, right? So how do we look at possible tech transfer issues when it comes to, transfer of tech from US to India? I know that India currently has this STA1 exception under the Department of Commerce Export Administration regulations. It came into place in 2018. However, the amount of commerce which has been transacted under it is currently a bit underwhelming. It's around $7 million. So is this a case where we need to sensitize the governments more about, this STA exception so that they can do their bit in reaching downstream to space companies, defense companies, and let them know about the STA1 exception? Or do you think the Indus-X could be a platform to sort of run these export control boot camps where we can, again, bring in the companies, have them talk to each other, and have the administrators from the DOC, the DOS come and basically talk about what's exactly the holdup when it comes to tech transfer between the US to India? So I guess the question here is, when it comes to co-development of technologies, right, tech transfer is a very essential part of it. But if export control restrictions are going to be sort of an impediment, how do you think is the best way to address these issues? I think you're on mute, Samir. Sorry.
Yeah, Konak, a very, very relevant, question to this whole discussion. Before we get on to the crux of the matter, I think let's visit the overall Indus-X, what the agenda was. Definitely, the agenda was bilateral collaboration, between Indian and US companies. This was to be a defense innovation bridge under the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Tech, the ICET. Now, the whole idea for Indus-X is to, foster and facilitate partnerships amongst US and Indian defense companies of all sizes, incubators, accelerators, investors, academia, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to come up with joint challenges. We are envisioning the partnerships between industry and academia, industry and other organizations, which may be government controlled. But the big elephant in the room is, we're talking of these advanced technologies, but as soon as you start to talk about them or anything relevant which can be converted into a partnership, there are some measures of export control. Companies cannot discuss freely topics and subjects which technically falling under the ICET, in terms of breakthrough technology, in terms of blue sky technologies. But the relevance of the same is filtered down simply because the scale at which the discussion should happen do not happen because there are clearances required, on both sides. I would say more on the US side to talk of high technology areas, especially deep tech, and also certain export controlled related tech. So this is definitely an issue. We, as a company, New Space, in the past, we have ongoing programs both with Air Force Research Lab of the US Air Force, as well as, with Army Research Lab of the US Army. Now, we have been facing similar issues with them. But at the same time, there is facilitation to an extent of this little issue. These issues are taken up for export clearance, or at least the discussions are sanctioned in a measure where there is relevance around this. However, when dealing with a government organization in the US or in India, vis-a-vis a pure industry to industry, plaintiff speaking, there is a difference. Simply because the industry in the US, even if, we would like to talk on high technology areas, will always fall under the ambit of this discussion being under a certain law, a certain rule, which is governed by the export control, and hence will not be able to freely discuss these aspects. In fact, these companies, back in the US, they find it much more easier to interact with us. We, maintain the agenda simply because there is a clear understanding between, agencies like IDEX, who are mandated to support the growth of these technologies, especially the critical technologies, where we are supposed to, kind of get engaged. So there is a bit more clarity towards this particular event on the Indian side, but we definitely feel that, this problem has been highlighted to an extent. We definitely feel that, the more we discuss this, I mean, this is good that you have highlighted it today. But the more discussion happens on this, we will unlock mechanisms where we can exchange protocols, discussions, which are very relevant to kind of, help these high technology areas. The partnerships, naturally, we need something coming our way from an American partner, but this can only be unlocked once certain inhibitions are unlocked on the legal side. I think the relevance of ICET and Indus-X will fully be opened and exploited only when we address this particular issue, which is an important issue. And I think both sides should definitely work on mechanisms of unlocking this. Uh, we in India are looking forward to interact with companies back in the US. We in India are looking at technologies we can take on from the US, which will bolster our own, deep tech initiatives. That is how a country like India gains with collaborating with, a very advanced country like the US, which has been a technology leader since World War II. And for the success of this engagement, I think this is a very, very essential, collaboration. And one of the important facets is, having a more plaintive talk at a level which can be a little bit more, beyond the export control and other issues which we face.
Thanks, Samir. I think the key takeaway from that answer is that there has to be some demystification of the existing pathways which are already there when it comes to sort of, co-development or co-creation. So Neha, I want to come to you now on this, and I know that you had sort of, done something with the Texas A&M University as a part of the Indus-X, right? And you sort of had done something where you sort of applied for a DSP license. Would you like to share your key learnings from that particular experience?
Yes, Kunal. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I would like to just highlight, two things that has been my experience. So I work for the Air Force Research Lab for my postdoc. I also work for a space company in the US, developing re-entry technology. And I think my experience was that if there is a need from the customer, I think there are ways and means that are available in the US, to bypass some of these issues. And I think what would be pretty important will be that Indus-X can be that forum to actually help startups in India to understand some of these nuances, and also show them the path, how to emerge out of these ITAR issues and information sharing issues. So yeah, and also on the second point, Konark, so we did, we did take advantage of the Indus-X platform. In fact, Indus-X team connected us to a number of universities in the US. And this was primarily because we wanted to, do certain testing, which was not available in India. We needed to use some test labs. And through that engagement with the universities, actually it led to a collaboration with Texas A&M. And that was kind of very helpful. I feel these forums, these different types of forums which Indus-X creates are very good to actually introduce, different companies, different institutions, sort of creating a very, very healthy ecosystem of partnership.
That's a great takeaway there again. But if I can just dive a little bit deeper here, so the takeaway seems to be that yes, there's indeed scope for collaboration between the U.S. entities, especially the Air Force Research Lab, the Army Research Lab, and the Indian companies as well. I think the question which might be asked is that how do we think about possibly indigenous development in India as well, right? Because I think a valid question which might come up is that if you're going to have co-development and if you're going to have a challenge which eventually will focus on the same domain of technology, if there is a lack of a capability or if there's a lack of sort of domain expertise in that particular tech like on a particular side, how do we go about co-creating in that kind of a scenario? So the question really is, what more can India do to sort of incubate indigenous deep technology to the point that we sort of have a domestic industrial base and we don't necessarily need to collaborate, or we don't necessarily need to seek tech transfer from the likes of Air Force Research Lab or defense establishments in the US. It's really a case of domestic indigenous capability. How do we stoke that? Neha, that's yeah.
Yes. I think, in my opinion, like I've seen both sides of the ecosystem in some way, because when I worked for Air Force Research Lab, I did see them incubating a lot of startups, really working with companies and making them, succeed. But on the India side, I think our journey started a bit late, but nevertheless, I think a program like IDEX is actually taking it, really head on,
to create an ecosystem for supporting deep tech startups, specifically defense startups. But I think the conversation here is probably more broader than just defense deep tech, but overall deep tech ecosystem. What we saw missing when we started as a company, and I was kind of reintroducing myself in India after moving back from US. What we discovered was that the funding ecosystem had very large gaps. The funding ecosystem, both from a point of view of grants as well as VCs. And I think that gap is slowly getting filled up. And I think that is the primary thing that we need to develop in the country. I think that is slowly happening in the country, for India to be self-sufficient. The second thing that I would like to say is that deep tech takes longer, and most of the investment ecosystem is very used to short-term investments and short-term gains. The more we see VCs as well as investors getting educated about deep tech in India, the more it will benefit companies like us, because I think there has to be a perception created. What is deep tech? How long does it take? What is normal and what is not normal? How do you succeed? And what does that success look like? So I think there are a few successes already happening in the India market, and that those are good pointers. Companies like IdeaForge doing IPO, and that's kind of a good indication for investors to invest. Lastly, I would also like to say that the grant programs in India are also taking the next level now. US was already in that, for many decades, but now India is catching up fast. So we see things happening not just in the defense sector, but also in the telecom sector. So the government has announced TTDF fund, which is a large fund which will support deep tech, technology innovations in that sector. And I think the future is bright. We just need to keep at it. Yep. Back to you, Bernard.
Sure. Gaurav, I want to come into you for this follow-up question. Neha mentioned about how, funding is a key constraint sometimes for a few companies as well. Now, PSite has managed to do remarkably well as a part of the joint winner, or sort of as a winner for both the Indian and the US leg of the joint challenge. Now, my query is, how did you navigate this as the winner of both the US and the Indian challenge on the Indus-X side? What were your key takeaways when it came to winning these challenges? What would be the advice which you would like to give out to companies and firms when it comes to, essentially going for the Indus-X challenges?
Yeah. So what we saw as a company was, the problem statements are very bang on to the point. The US side wanted a solution based on satellite imagery to detect oil spills, while the Indian side wanted a solution for them which integrated the coastal sensors, right? So at PeerSite, as I said before, we were doubling down on the maritime use case. So, building custom-made solutions for both sides really helped us go through the mark. Yeah.
Right. Now, just as a follow-up on that again, Gaurav, I mean, you're clearly somebody who has, carved its own niche in this particular Earth observation ecosystem, but there are other companies in India also now which are coming up in the larger space ecosystem too, right? I just want to talk about how do you think the Indus-X initiative can drive this trend going forward? Would more joint challenges, would more challenges in the space domain help out companies? Or could these also be complemented with the whole of government approach where we don't just float challenges, but also have funding mechanisms, procurement also sort of being assured to companies between these challenges as well? So is it just about floating challenges under the Indus-X mechanism, or can we also be doing something additional, complementary in terms of legislation, in terms of assured procurement as well?
Yeah. So of course, assured procurement will definitely help. Space tech companies, if you see them globally, before commercial customers come in, right? Commercial customers will come in once you have the complete capacity up there. But the forward investment needs to be done by having anchor customers in terms of governance, right? So more and more challenges, in my opinion, should come up where these anchor customers post their problems, and once they are solved by the startups, it should follow a procurement strategy. for them to hold on to these anchor customers, help them build the capacity. And once the capacity is up there, definitely a lot of commercial use cases will also start to come in. If we see the case of companies like SpaceX, which were heavily supported by anchor customers initially, and later on, once the capacity was well developed, we now see more and more commercial customers coming up and equaling the anchor customers.
Sure, Gaurav. So me, that's interesting though. You sort of really, led a company here which has really carved a path in India when it comes to drone technology, right? Something which India did not really have much of a capability in a few years back. But the question is, Gaurav spoke about anchor customers and government playing an incubating role. As one of the companies who's, one of the main customers is the Indian Armed Forces, how has your experience been in dealing with the government? What more do you think can be done by the government in sort of helping scale these new technologies? I think you're on mute, Samir. Sorry.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that. Konak, we are living in some very interesting times. Just to give you perspective, government customer was what made a Boeing and a Lockheed Martin after World War II. It is the same customer which can make or break a sizable scaling up in the aerospace and defense sector. There is no way that there is a secondary or a tertiary customer. Now, if we are talking about the aerospace and defense sector, and anybody who's intending to come in as a startup, MSME, or a big player, we will definitely need to know how to navigate this space. Now, of course, while all this is happening, and there was some distrust by some venture funds over the years, in the defense sector. But lately, in the last about 5 to 6 years, things are changing, and the way the legacy platforms and the business around them was done between big majors and the government is definitely changing. Now, we in India also are seeing a big wave. There is something called Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India, the initiative, which actually led to a fantastic, initiative like the IDEX sprouting out in India. So the government of India is pushing companies in the disruptive sector, critical sectors. They are, really focusing on technologies which will beef up as well as add on to application areas of technology, as well as products and platforms which can kind of pivot to deliver fantastic mission opportunities for the aerospace and defense sector. And when you have a customer who is more, willing to kind of take a look at, disruption and technology development at scale in an indigenous format, things become much more easier for people like us. So this is where New Space kind of, spawned out. We started back in 2018. And since then, we have been able to create, very niche kind of technologies and capabilities, which we have not only been able to evangelize with the government, but also been able to kind of, deliver the same. So this is not only a New Space bit, but this is also the times that we live in, the government, the policies. It is enabling formats like the defense acquisition policy. It's got procurement routes where a company like New Space can work directly with the end user via a format like IDEX. So there is a positive recognition that, just the way it's happening in the US is kind of moving on from the big five, to companies like Anduril, Shield AI, which themselves have been products of the DIU. So what I'm trying to say here essentially is that the government is realizing that, if we have to scale up opportunities and capabilities in aerospace and defense, it is going to be a landscape, maneuver where, a host of companies will have to be taken up, scaled up to a level where, these capabilities can be built up, can be retrofitted, can be aligned with the larger needs of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the policies have to definitely fall in place towards that. So the government has focused on policy creation, routes through procurement, where a startup today can take part in a big tender, which may be, hundreds of crores. About 2 years back, this was just not possible because your revenue was counted there. So, these are enablers which have been put place by the government. The only tack, I leave and I say here is that the onus is on people like us now. Anybody who's participating here, the government can only take you so far. There is an enabler, there is a system in place. The little bit missing here is where the government could do a bit more is maybe in the funding side. But then we do understand the nuances around it. They can't have a favoritism approach. You need to prove, your block. You need to prove your spurs. Only then, the government can put its weight around you after you reach a certain milestone. And this is where I think the little gap is. And I'm very glad to tell you, the VC environment in India is also opening up to a great extent. Obviously, this is propelled by the geopolitics, where India is. We are always under some manner of threat, a security threat. Also, because of the conflicts around the world, have just said that we are at a cusp of change in warfare, where new technologies are going to be differentiating themselves, kind of be creating that disruptions where no more is this the domain of big players. Anybody who can create a technology which can rapidly increase the mission quotient for a certain, enabling factor is in favor, is the flavor of the month for the government. All we need to do is now, we as companies working in deep tech space have to make products, technologies which align with the mission needs of the end user, that is the government. So the government is a player. The funding environment is kind of resonating now, as is happening in the US. A lot of funds are focusing in the drone sector and the enabling sectors. I'll put it this way, in aerospace defense. And I think the future is very bright. But as I said, the onus is on companies like us to walk the talk. And I hope, as Neha said, there are, people like IdeaForge who have gone into an IPO. This is good news for the sector. The government is definitely going to push this sector. There is scale. India has a massive defense budget, and there is a huge need for import substitution. So I think sky is the limit for companies like us. It's just a matter of how a certain technology development actually converts into a useful product. And that is the onus of not the government, but the startups and the MSMEs in India.
Gaurav, I want to come over to you for a follow-up question. And Garut also wanted to follow up with a question to you as well. Samir mentioned in his answer about how you have to essentially create technologies for the government, and that there's a key role in at least providing a roadmap to companies, right? Now, the US Department of Defense came out with this initiative called the Replicator Initiative, which is essentially something about, fielding iterative incremental pieces of technologies from concept to battlefield within 18 to, or like say 24 months. That's a very compressed timeline within which to sort of achieve that kind of execution, right? Do you think that the Indus-X sort of has taken, lead from that particular idea where we sort of now are focusing on technologies which are increasingly iterative and not necessarily focused on huge platforms? And Garut, then the follow-up question to you would be, given that this initiative is largely in the US, how do Indian investors, what kind of window would you have into the mind of an Indian investor here? Can an Indian investor essentially invest in a US company which is sort of participating in a challenge as a part of the Indus-X? So over to you, Gaurav, first, and then Garut, a follow-up remark from you as well.
Yeah. So, Konark, I wasn't aware of the program which you just mentioned, but I would like to point out that IDEX also works on a very similar mechanism, where 24 months are given to a company to prove a technology which follows on by a procurement. Indus-X is also done by DIO, which is owner of and started the IDEX programs. And I think this is a good time frame for companies to demonstrate their worth, as Samir was also mentioning, and can be followed on by more procurement.
Garut, over to you.
Yeah, I think in theory, programs like Replicator are what's needed, right? You need to be able to identify that there's an emerging threat. You need to say that, hey, DoD has broad range authorities, or a procurement entity within DoD has broad range authority to say this is an emerging threat. Here are new entrants to the game, whether it's Anduril, Performance Drone Works, PDW, any of these startups, to essentially say, hey, we can solve this, and then execute then provide that capital as efficiently as possible versus the 3 to 5 year procurement cycle times and that defense procurement is oftentimes known for. Like working with governments is never easy, and that's why oftentimes a lot of people ditch it to go work with private industry first or focus quite a bit on private commercial customers. I think I think for I'll just speak to myself as opposed to Indian investors. I think from my perspective on investing in Indian companies is when I look at an investment, there's a lot of capex R&D costs that it takes in order to get a product to technical readiness level that's ready for government procurement. And during that life cycle process, the U.S. government, to the credit of DIU, to the credit of Air Force Research Labs, AFRL, the brilliant folks down within InQtel, all of these entities, they do provide incredible support to companies to go from 60% readiness to 90% readiness. And so to be very clear, venture capital dollars are not meant to take you from R&D to production. That is not the intent. The intent is that it's a public-private partnership where venture dollars will help accelerate growth. And so for me, what I need to have a firm understanding of is, do the Indians have the infrastructure, or will there be a path to an infrastructure similar to a DIU providing X amount of $1 million for product development combined with US venture capital dollars? And so for me, I think once that is answered, I think it's very easy for American investors to go in and say, we can provide a couple $1 million, but the Indian government also has to have skin in the game. It's not just the contract that will say, hey, when you guys meet these requirements, we'll provide you a contract for a minimum order quantity of 20 SKUs. It's more of a saying, hey, we're going to give you a contract eventually for 20 SKUs, like widgets, but before you get there, we need to ramp up. And here's a $30 million program over 5 different contracts to make that happen. So I don't know the funding mechanisms for India to make that happen, but in the U.S., we have many different entities that help the R&D sector go to the second arm of the DoD, which is called the Acquisitions and Sustainment Group, right? So there's two sides of the coin. You need to have R&D in order to get to that acquisition and sustainment level. And in America, we have a lot of infrastructure. And even with that infra, it's very difficult. So I think as an American investor, what Indus-X needs to do and what the Indian tech landscape needs to do is about articulate that public-private partnership is there, not just the contract that says, we'll give it to you once you meet our requirements.
Right. Neha, I mean, this is essentially about finding the right product fit, right? So if I can just come over to you now and just talk about the Indus-X has been really helpful in sort of floating challenges, but is there a role or is there some kind of an additional add-on mechanism which could be added afterwards or in the future where we just talk about not just the companies winning the challenges, but also some kind of a venture accelerator kind of thing where we sort of, give them the guidance to sort of, find the right product fit. Do you think that is something which could be possibly looked at?
Yes, absolutely. I think finding the right product market fit is extremely important. And if there can be a mechanism created for Indian companies to understand the US market, because the two markets are very different at the end of the day, they're not the same. Access to customers, getting their feedback on product can be a game changer for Indian companies. So I think that's really, really important. And the second thing in your question, which is also very important, is to create mechanisms for US investors to invest in India headquartered company, either in India headquartered company or there is a structure, that is acceptable, which is India US, like peer site, kind of a structure. So I think mobilizing VC investments both ways and specifically from US to India, as well as customer interactions are really, really important. I feel those two things can help. Like, for example, in the IDEX contracts, we do interact with the end customer directly. So if, not just as part of a challenge, but there can be a different forum, which is connecting, customers with, solution providers, which is independent of winning a challenge or not. Because I understand it cannot be many challenges, that can be flown out for, like a two country program. So yeah.
Great. Now, Garut, I again want to come back to you on this. You mentioned a bunch of things, all the facilities available to people in the US if they sort of want to go about, selling a product or getting an order for procurement. But my question is, as somebody who's also sort of seen familiar, things from a close-up angle in the Indian ecosystem, what kind of takeaways would you sort of want to incorporate from the US system into the Indus-X mechanism to sort of help, co-development between US and Indian companies?
Yeah, I think this is it's a pretty deep question because I think it involves a couple different facets. I think the first is, I think, more granular and crystal clear legal frameworks to work with it when it comes down to ITAR, or export controlled information. Senator Marco Rubio just proposed elevating India to NATO levels with a similar level to Japan. I think in order for America to counter China in that region, we have to work with the largest democracy in the world, which are the Indians, and the human capital there is incredible. I mean, the universities there, on par or even better than Caltech and MIT, right? Just the sheer talent and raw talent and the firepower. My father came from Bangalore in the 70s to pursue his PhD in the United States, and my family's been here for decades. So I'm a proud Indian American. But I think first and foremost is there needs to be an elevation of India to. I don't know if it's the same as, let's say, AUKUS, but adjacent in that realm, right? To be included in those types of conversations. And I think the second thing is that there needs to be a lot of education for American investors as to what is going on in India. And I think Indus-X does a good job of that. Once again, Joe Lonsdale from ABC was in India. And I think you have guys like Vinod Khosla and a bunch of other folks who are incredibly prominent deep tech investors who are getting involved. I think another thing to dive deeper into this is, I think the Indians also need to have kind of like a similar system to the Israelis, right? Where they do attract foreign. I mean, you look at there was a VC delegation that happened in Israel where they met with a bunch of the IDF members and all that kind of stuff. So I think DRDO, Ministry of Defense, the Indian Foreign Service, I think need to step up their game in order to attract top talent from the US and Europe to come to India to understand what is the landscape and ecosystem like. And I think Indus-X is a great platform to do that, right? Having conversations with senior members of ISRO, senior members of the R&D establishment, the Army, the Navy, all these entities. There's multiple American startups that would love to do business with India, but it's relatively hard to do that, right? So being able to stand up and say India is open for business, and there's two sides of the equation where Americans and Indians can work together is important. But there's a lot of stuff there that I said, but I would say at a high level you need to focus on regulation that uplift India to being on par with Japan or some of our other partners in the Indo-Pacific. I would say the second thing is India needs to do a better job of PR, and they should leverage the ecosystem in the Bay. I mean, there's a big presence of Indian Americans in the Bay and in Austin, Texas, and a lot of these different areas. And I would say the third is I think the Indians need to do a lot of PR themselves on hosting delegations, not at the government level. There's plenty of government to government interaction. I think you need private sector involvement, right? You don't need just the Boeings and Lockheeds. I think that's, Boeing and Lockheed, they don't chase innovation, they chase contracts. That's kind of a provocative statement to make, but I don't think it's too spicy. What I will say is that I think the Indians need to be courting VCs, and I think they need to be courting defense tech startups, because I think that's where the real quantum innovation, the real quantum leaps are happening, right? You should be bringing in large, not large, but like the SpaceXs of the world who can do, co-development, right? You could be bringing in, if you're talking about quantum, Sandbox AQ, which is like a Google spin out. You can be bringing in all of these entities that are there, Palantir. These are the large companies, and then also the growth companies as well that I would bring in. So Indus-X can be that platform to really marry the two together. And I think there's nothing but exciting times ahead. I mean, we live in a very dynamic world, and I'm excited for the strengthening of the relationship between the oldest and largest democracy.
Well, that's an excellent answer, Guru. Thank you. I think it basically, touched upon legal frameworks, export controls, sort of marketing India a bit better. But then again, I would like to again come back to the Indus-X. Samir, this is for you. A lot of the collaboration which might happen under the Indus-X could probably be from the US side, with the primes coming to India and mentoring a few Indian space companies or defense companies, as the case may be, right? Deep tech companies, essentially. How have you thought about possibly a mentor-protege partnership program kind of within the Indus-X? Is there scope for that taking on? What is the view from your point of view, from your
Also,
vantage?
sorry to butt in there. I think we should focus less on the primes and focus more on entities that are more willing to partner or that are, I think, a little bit more innovative, right? So instead of the overemphasis on Boeing and Lockheed, I don't know if Boeing even has a VC arm, right? Like Lockheed Ventures does have one, right? I would focus more on the SpaceXs of the realm. I would focus more on the Andurils of the realm, right? These are the countries that are really moving innovation to the levels that it needs to be. The peers in the US, right? Like take 20 years to field, an F-35 jet that's already obsolete, right? So America has its problems in terms of defense innovation. We can be much better. And I looked at defense technology, the new entrants that are gaining, I would say, notoriety or prominence. That I think should be the emphasis. But look, Boeing and Lockheed, Raytheon, all these primes have a lot of money. They do a lot, but I didn't mean to interrupt. That's just my hot take, is that I think we should widen the aperture to the Andurils and the Palantirs of the world, not just the Lockheeds and the Boeings.
That's a great point, Garud. And I think I'll just expand on that a little bit. I mean, if you're going to be talking about co-development and essentially, co-production, so one of the things I've often heard as a part of this debate on co-development, at least, is that it's hard to convince investors to put in money for a technology which has not really been tested yet, right? That's essentially what co-development is about. You haven't really produced it yet. You're just kind of trying to, come up with a prototype, and then essentially, eventually, if things work out, scale the product as well. How do you look at co-development when, normally speaking, traditionally, India has not invested much in R&D, right? The IDEX has been a huge support for the Indian space companies, defense companies, deep tech companies. But when it comes to their own internal R&D spend, how do we sort of, Samir, this is for you actually, how do you make that jump from kind of pushing up the R&D expenditure for Indian companies? Because if any meaningful co-development is going to happen between, as I was mentioned, between the Palantirs, between the Andurils, and an Indian company, then there's going to be an expectation for a heavy R&D lift from the Indian side as well. So how do we go about sort of making this shift in the Indian side for more R&D expenditure?
See, this is a catch-22 question, simply because many of our companies in India, we are actually vamping for funds. We are vamping for fundings. If we start with this premise that, the whole point of an American company kind of co-development with an Indian entity is there is going to be captive R&D strength in that company, that may not be the case. There is a difference between an idea and an idea which has been put on the roadmap and which is deployed. So coming back to the larger question which you posed is American companies, and Garuth was very right, the big five are always there. They're trying to become smarter now with more M&As and other aspects getting into the space. But my question is, or rather, in fact, what we have interacted around is even companies like Anduril and Shield and, the players which are flexing their muscles through the huge technology development, which they've done over some years, the space that we are in, everybody wants to grow very fast. And in certain questions, certain behaviors are not very indifferent from the big five. Okay, so what happens when a company in India wants to woo a company like Anduril? That is where what Konark you asked rapidly kicks in. Okay, what does that company get, things back? How much can I contribute to what Anduril has already done? What is a program left for me where an Anduril can, take some benefit from me? Are we at that stage? The straight answer is no. neither in aerospace, defense space. We are nowhere close to, certain high technology areas where the American ecosystem is working at. However, there is space for a lot of creative technologies and product development. Certain issues, certain aspects of the deep tech which have not been addressed, or which have not been addressed at either a cost point, either at an infrastructure point or a technology point, which makes it more affordable, more effectual, more creative. Look at a host of systems coming up in Ukraine, which has caught the fancy and attention of the US DoD. What you would have seen, was in the news recently that ecosystem, which captures the sound of the drones, which the Ukrainians have put it all across. The US DoD is actually thinking of replicating that. But the question here is, as soon as will the US DoD take it at the same cost point? Because as soon as they come, they will start to add layers, which is the right thing to do, based on their own security protocols. So what I'm trying to say here is that Indian companies, are they ready? Are there technologies in India which are of interest with US companies? May not necessarily be the case. Okay. What is it that which has to be in place for an Indian company to be able to work with an American company is a program of meaningful future technology evolution, which is beneficial both for India and the US. Now, this is where, the DIU and IDEX, as well as the end user on both sides, will have to start working. So I'll give you an example. We, there are other initiatives between India and the US. One very old initiative is the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, DTTI. Now, we as a company are part of, this program in a way where we are supporting the DRDO, working with the FRL. Here, a company like us can support a mechanism in the way that, it is envisaged. But this is a very finite shape which is being given. But under an Indus-X or an ISET, the flavor of the program is always towards creating something dynamic, something which is futuristic, because that is a flavor what IDEX would like to push, to create that critical tech which is needed to create that disruption in the battlefield. And I think it was Garut who mentioned yesterday that there is a difference, there is a slip between the lip and the cup. We may feel very happy, making products which work great in the lab, at a TRL 6 or a 7. But for the end user, the product should work in the battlefield. And that is where taking from a TRL 6, 7 to a 9 is totally a different flavor. Are us companies experienced enough? I mean, even the bigger companies in India are not. Having delivered 2 long-term contracts, which includes one of the swarm drone delivery, which we have done to the Indian DoD, Indian MOD, it takes a while. And at this juncture, companies like us, we have a certain flavor which can attract American, companies, simply because we can do things at possibly a cost point which is lower. Cost is definitely something, which plays up in everybody's mind. But largely the American companies at this juncture are looking to transfer technology developed in the US to India, and under a co-development route, kind of scale it to the next level. So this is the flavor which is rightly underway between India and the US under the Indus-X. But is the disruption happening at the next level where we would ideally want it to be? No, there is some distance and some gap to be covered. Yes.
Neha, I saw that you had your hand raised. Do you want to come in?
Yes, yes. So I just wanted to give a different perspective than Samir. As a company, Astrom actually started with developing like a wireless technology for LEO constellation at a time when Starlink was not even, announced. And we started working on a disruptive technology, which just like a year back, people started testing that frequency band from space, including Starlink. So I think there is innovation in India. There is a lot of innovation. Just to give you a success story in terms of that innovation, helping us partner with US, we actually use that technology to commercialize into a commercially usable, telecom product. And just by the merit of what that technology was, how it was taking the game to the next level, we were able to attract partnership with companies in the US who wanted to, I think I do agree with Garut and Samir that the primes are not always, or the largest companies in a sector are not always the good ones to partner with. Probably the tier 2 and even startup levels are much easier to partner with, and that's kind of our experience as well. So we are sort of now introducing this new technology from India, developed in India completely, into the US market. But where the gap is, I will say that the gap still remains in what Samir said, and that gap is we need to go from TRL 6 to TRL 9, and for that we need money. And the money is the missing piece, I feel, because to attract the right kind of talent, to attract the right kind of team, you do need capital, and that capital from going from TRL 6 to 9, if that can be filled, I think India can do very well as a product nation.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. You spoke about navigating the US market, introducing your commercial wireless communication. How has that been for you? How has that been going for you as one of the few companies who's managed to sort of penetrate penetrate the US market? What have been the takeaways which you want to share with the Indian companies?
Yes, I think one of the key takeaways that we realized was two things. First is the Indian market and the US market. There is a big difference in how business is done. So as a company, we really had to understand how business is done in the US. What is the ecosystem? What are do's and don'ts? I think those are things, if Indus-X can take up as sort of education topics, that will be really great. The second thing, most important thing, was customer interviews. I think I don't think I can stress it enough that understanding the customer's requirement, and which may be different from an Indian customer versus a US customer, is the key to the success. So we spent about a year just talking to customers, just figuring out what are their pain points, and those pain points were different from the Indian market. And recognizing those pain points, and also addressing those pain points, was a key to be able to even say today that we are going to enter the US market, and there is enough traction on the US side to have a center.
So Konark, I would actually say the success of an Indus-X and a DIU collaboration between Indus-X, DIU and IDEX is going to actually happen when an Indian company is actually allowed to participate in a program like the Replicator.
Right. I think we're kind of nearing the end of our panel discussion, and we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A box. So Chitra, if it's okay, may I address a few of them right now?
Yeah, let's quickly take the questions. I think which is very important.
Because we have quite a few questions on this chat box. Okay, so this is a question for Samir and Garut from Harsh Joshi. The question is, what is your take or insights on HAPS and its future, the high altitude performance systems and its future? Specific question for Samir, as you have already built one HAPS, why did you choose to go with the HTA and not the LTA? So Garut, first over to you, and then Samir as a follow-up.
Is HAPS high altitude? It's kind of like a high altitude drone. Look, I think from an investment standpoint, my thesis around certain technologies is this a commodity-based technology? And if it is, I don't make investments in it. Specifically, what's the cost delta between the imagery or the service that's being provided by HAPS via, let's say, an asset in space? So I've looked at a couple of these different companies, and I think like the market and the demand oftentimes is a little bit overstated, but I haven't seen too many successful businesses in this sector yet, but I'm very much open to it. So I'm very amenable to any technology that I think will move the ball forward and provide value to customers and return the fund. So I think that's the prism that I look through it. It could be a great technology, but it's got to have a solid customer demand.
Samir, over to you.
Yeah, so HAPS, high altitude pseudo satellite, just for everybody's benefit, is a platform which flies in the stratosphere, at an altitude of about 20-25 kilometers. And at this juncture, it is powered largely by the sun through solar panels. And the whole idea is to take the energy of the sun during the day to power the aircraft for flight and charge your batteries, and at night to kind of fly your aircraft on the batteries. Now, over the years, substantial progress has taken place in this sector. Obviously, the world leader in this space has been Airbus, which took off a spin-off from a company in the UK called Kinetic. Their progress was fantastic in terms that they have proven that multi-day flight is possible. In fact, the world record of 60 something days over Yuma proving grounds 2 years back is held by Airbus. Now, there's a lot of interest, largely for military applications, simply because if you can have a platform flying over a certain place for a very long time, you get into persistent surveillance space. So largely for surveillance and communication functions, the HAPS is a fantastic platform. For military, surveillance is definitely on the chart, plus communication long-term relays. When you're flying higher, you can see very far, and you can also hear a lot. So, electronic intelligence and certain EW functions come up. But there is a huge, huge market on the civilian side for beaming down wireless from the sky, simply because, HAPS flying at 20 kilometers can be much more efficient in a lot of ways to relay down wireless signals rather than a satellite flying in low Earth orbit, because of certain latencies and more challenges for the waves to propagate through the atmosphere. So it has a certain market. There is a philosophy. There is a backing now behind companies like Airbus. Airbus has spun off into something called Altos, which is going into the commercial side of things. Then there is BAE Systems and American companies working with the Japanese ecosystem. In India, there is a definitive push by the government of India. And, there is now going to be soon, while IDEX is supported, we have just finished the first iteration of our IDEX program on the HAPS, where we were to prove the multi-day flight, and we are closing this program. The Navy is giving us the next program, but the larger program, which aims for, 3 months of flight time in the air, is coming through the Indian Air Force, and it's going to be through the Make One mechanism. So where, about 70% funding actually comes from the government of India. So this is definitely on the cards. Now, the specific question, why we chose through the heavier than air rather than the lighter than air, which is a balloon, So two ways you can spend a long time being over a certain place. Either you are heavier, using propulsion to kind of mitigate, the additional weight so that you can maintain over a point, you can fly around. Or you can be a balloon, which is lighter than air, and you can be, you can spend a long time. I mean, we've seen Chinese balloons circumventing the Earth many times over. So I think for a company like us, it was important that we are a pure military-focused organization as of now. And at this juncture, we wanted a quick platform which could be moved around, can be reorganized over new area of interests. And that is where it was essentially, something which could fly faster, which could negotiate more winds, which are the advantages of a drone-based system. Obviously, there is a disadvantage. You can carry lesser payload in the same. So that was our major reason where we went for a HTA rather than a LTA format. And we are looking at HAPS as something which will come up. The stratosphere is going to open up for aviation in the years ahead. And the HAPS genre of platforms are going to be the forerunners in this particular space, beyond troposphere. And I think the technology is very challenging. It is near disruption, to be very frank, in a lot of ways. But it is being supported by technology levels, being achieved in higher density batteries, better solar panels with better efficiencies, and technologies which support lighter structures and is more lightweight, which is, mind you, spinning off a lot of IPR in a way that not has been seen before. But it is a challenging area. It will take time to consolidate. So there is a huge commercial success waiting on the other side of the tunnel for this. But as Garut says that it is a technology which is underway, a work in progress. And I think it's going to take about 3 to 4 more years before we get the first spin-off in pure commercial success in the HAPS genre.
Thanks, Samir. The next question is from Rajiv K. It's not addressed to anyone specifically, but this talks about other US companies participating in the Indus-X. I think this could be better answered by the DIU folks, but probably I'll go to the next leg of the same question, which is is there a mechanism for collaboration between Indian and US companies for Indus-X? Now, I guess what this question is going to ask at some point is that, or rather what it's really aiming towards is that, are we going to be inching towards a situation eventually down the line where we have, Indian winners of US challenges and vice versa? So if the idea is to basically eventually kind of enmesh the industrial bases of both the US and India, it'll probably make sense at some point to sort of look at the challenges being floated in a manner whereby you have Indian winners of US challenges and vice versa as well. So I know that there's nobody on the call right now or nobody on the webinar right now who can really address this question, but perhaps something to think about. But Gaurav, as somebody who's actually won the challenges on both the sides, how far-fetched do you think this is a possibility where we actually have US entities sort of coming towards Indian challenges and vice versa?
I think both sides have their own rules. So, for example, PeerSite, two separate sister entities won it from India and US, because both sides have certain requirements in terms of legal eligibility. So, I think it's more towards DIU and NSIN to dilute these or not dilute them. But yeah, it would be really exciting if both sides open it up for each other.
Right. There's a last question left. It's by Nitish Gupta. It's not addressed to anyone in particular, but this talks about how, given the complex and evolving nature of modern warfare, could you please elaborate on the critical role of battlefield management systems in enhancing military capabilities? How do you envision BMS systems contributing to India's strategic objectives and addressing specific challenges posed by the region's security landscape? Samir, do you want to take this one on? Okay, right.
Yeah. I was just having this little interlude. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Sure. So, Samir, there's a question from Nitish Gupta. It talks about how, given the complex and evolving nature of modern warfare, could you please elaborate on the critical role of battlefield management systems in enhancing military capabilities? How do you envision BMS systems contributing to India's strategic objectives and addressing specific challenges posed by the region's security landscape?
Yeah, because he's very right. BMS is the core towards managing multi-domain warfare. As we are getting into many spectrums of war, the fusion of information from all these spectrums has to be not only done efficiently, but the right data gleaned out so that an information as well as a decision support, metric can be made where commanders can take the right decisions. But this battlefield management system does exactly this. I think it's a very, very core program. We have seen countries like the US, having BMSs in place right from the 1960s onwards. However, in India, it is just about now that the proliferation of the same, as well as research and development and getting to address these problem statements by especially the Indian MOD has started. BMS is going to be a very vital component for any kind of warfare. And why I am insisting and impressing more on the multi-domain warfare is because this is the future. The command, largely any kind of effect which is created, is kinetic or non-kinetic, is going to go through the medium which has to be captured through a battlefield management system. And this becomes a very, very critical component of any kind of offensive or defensive maneuver which any organization does. Yes.
So I think that with that, we reached the end of our Q&A round and kind of we'll be ending early here. But before we do, I just want to sort of, give a shout out to everybody on the NSIN team and the IDEX team as well for really putting this together. I think it turned out really well. Thanks to Eddie, Rahul, Javier, and Chitra, of course, for sort of, putting it together and, bringing who I thought were the really key people to have for this key discussion to be taking place right now. A lot of insights gleaned from this discussion, basically talking about, I think, how the government can only do so much. I think there's also an onus on the companies also, to sort of chart out a roadmap, do more on R&D, do more on product fit. And I think those are points all well taken. Now, before we close this particular webinar, I just want to say that there's the Indus-X Summit, which is happening on the 9th and 10th of September. It's going to be happening in Bay Area, if I'm not wrong, and it will be co-hosted with Stanford University. This is, again, only an invite-only event, so it's not open to, I guess, everybody in the general public. But for those of you who will be attending, I guess the invitations will go out soon, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. Thank you, everyone.